Hello, this is a homily for the 16th Sunday of the year. We'll notice that there is a theme of shepherding that runs through the readings, and I'd like to fit that into something that we all should know something about, sharing in the offices of Christ. In the Old Testament, the mediators between God and the people of Israel were prophets, priests, and kings. Last week we talked about prophets. This week we talk about kings. The idea of the shepherd king goes back a long way, certainly to David, who himself was a shepherd. And these three mediating roles were taken over by Jesus Christ. So one person with all three offices, and he was the prophet, the priest, and the king. And so you will find references to that in the New Testament. Here we're simply dealing with the idea of shepherding, and hence the idea of kingship. And there are two sides to that, as we'll see. We still use this understanding in the church now, and you'll find it all in Lumen Gentium if you are interested in looking at that any further in the section on the people of God. So we start off with reading from Jeremiah 23, and he's telling us about shepherding, even though he's announcing the facts in the form of a set of woes. Woe to the shepherds, you have not cared for your people, etc., etc. In other words, the shepherd is one who has to lead and gather the flock, not mislead and scatter the flock. The shepherd has to care for his flock, not forget to care for them. Then, and this is where the Christological opening happens, you have Jeremiah, inspired by God, obviously. He is one of God's called prophets. And God is saying, I myself will gather the remnant of my flock, bring them back to their meadows. There they shall increase and multiply. And you have in that phrase, increase and multiply, the phrase from the book of Genesis, which is what human beings are meant to do. So we've got a picture of shepherding as God understands it. And then he goes on to say that this will come from David's family, and they will give this new shoot from the tree of Jesse, the Lord our justice. So the shepherd, the king, is one who brings justice to the world, and it's literally a right-ordered world. In the psalm, the Lord is my shepherd, we know that psalm very well. I shall not want. This is what the shepherd is doing, is making sure that his flock don't want. In verdant pastures he gives me repose, beside restful waters he leads me. All of this, of course, would apply beautifully to Jesus Christ on his coming. He refreshes my soul. Does our Christianity refresh our soul? He guides me in right paths. And again we have this notion of justice. For his name's sake. For even though I walk in the dark valley, I fear no evil, for you are at my side with your rod and your staff. Rod and staff, signs of kingship. You spread the table before me. Interesting shift here to what we would read as a Eucharistic celebration where the Lord himself spreads a table before us in the sight of our foes. Only goodness and kindness follow me all the days of my life. And now the punchline, I shall dwell in the house of the Lord. The house could be a royal house, but also dwelling in the house means being in the protected zone of the king. And the king has drawn us into his house. Now, this ties up very nicely with the theology that you find in Second Vatican Council, where the writers talk about the kingship that we participate in, the kingship of Christ. And what we have here is this authoritative role in our lives. So Christ is king for me. And if we remember our Augustine said that my soul is head of my body, my Lord is head of my soul. What we have here is a beautiful understanding of the right ordering of the spiritual and the temporal life. There's a lot more on kingship in the Vatican II documents, because obviously they don't just draw from these two readings that we've just had. But we hear a lot about being submissive to the king. The priest, for example, exercises the offices of priest, prophet, and king. And so he has the power of governance over his parish, and the bishop has his power of governance over the diocese. Governance so that all these beautiful things that are mentioned in the psalm can take place in the life of the flock, whether it's a diocese or a parish. Then we go to the letter to the Ephesians, and Paul is talking about one specific thing that happens when Christ comes. He says, he who made both one. What Paul is referring to is the reuniting of Jews and Gentiles. And this has much prehistory to it, but the point is the Jews are where salvation is going to come from, and for Paul it has already come in the person of Jesus Christ. But it's not only a salvation for the Jews, it is salvation for the Gentiles too, and as we know, Paul is called the apostle to the Gentiles. So what happens now is a very interior thing. He might create in himself one new person, this is in Jesus Christ, one new person in place of the two, thus establishing peace. So because Christ has come, the unity between Jews and Gentiles must be reestablished, and both then are reconciled with God in one body through the cross. All Paul's words here. And through him we both have access in the one Spirit to the Father. This is this vast interior spiritual life that Paul is describing, that comes about because of the reunifying of Jew and Gentile, because the reconciling of the two of us with God, and therefore we have access, as he puts it, to the Father. Now we go to the Gospel reading, and the Gospel reading is from Mark chapter 6. Here you have, again, the reference to the shepherd. Comes right at the end of the reading, but they were like sheep without a shepherd. The build-up to that is that the apostles came back to Jesus. He's the king, he's the shepherd, he's the one that they all refer to. Notice they're not doing independent ministries. We have a different idea of being a person overlaid with what really is an excessive understanding of individualism. And there is a call within Christianity of a certain conformity, that we conform to the life of Christ by being under Christ, by accepting his lordship in our lives, so that I am no longer a private agent, but I am being graced, gifted, moved forward in my life to serve his people and ultimately the world. This is a beautiful transformation of human life from individual, let's call it greed, let's call it excessive ambition and so forth, being moved towards serving both God and the community. Now, all of this reporting on their part brings them to Jesus taking care of them. Come away by yourselves to a deserted place and rest a while. There were so many people coming to see them that they just couldn't handle the crowds that were coming. He disembarked. Jesus goes with them, goes on a boat. And when he disembarks, he sees the crowd because they've kind of worked out where these apostles were going. His heart was moved with pity for them. We're now seeing the inner life of the shepherd, the inner experience. For they were like sheep without a shepherd, and he began to teach them many things. And the teaching is very much part of the role of the shepherd. We have an idea that we simply find information for ourselves. In some sense, that's always been true. But there is a fact that if I'm referring to Scripture, I am not just making up my own interpretation, but I am seeing what the church has to say about it. And if I am reading about Christian virtue, let's say, I find out what the church, what the tradition of the church has to say about it. There's a lot to the shepherding, both externally, where I help to bring the rest of the world under the lordship of Christ. Also, interiorly, I have to be brought inside myself to be submissive to the shepherd. So there's both the interior movement and the external movement. I think we'll leave that there. Have a great day.